you first grew curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to Haunted WWII.
And welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of House of Azure. This is episode 74, and thank you for tuning in. It is freaking freezing here in Western Kentucky. It's just freaking chilly, man. So it's so cold. I'm not even seeing people out in tractors and overalls or any of that, man. They're staying in the house next to the hearth and trying to keep their toes from freezing off. Anyway, unrelated completely to the subject matter of today. Other than unless you want to write a book about ghost toes, but I don't think my friend here wants to do that. Anyway, this guy has written a lot of books. I've heard him on some great podcasts, including Richard Serrett's podcast, and this guy's a very interesting person, unlike myself. But he's touched on rock and roll related hauntings, country hauntings, and one of the things we're going to be talking about today is World War II ghosts. And let me go ahead and introduce my guest, Mr. Matt Swayne. And I almost called you Swainster right there.
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever you want to call me. It's just great to be on your show. Really excited.
Dude, I appreciate it. And like I said, it means a lot. Because like I said, I've followed your stuff there for a while. And it's just, I'm just sort of taken back that I was actually able to get you on. So that's killer. So let's talk a little bit about your origin story. Everybody has one. So what kind of brought you to all this?
So my origin story actually starts at my origin, at my birth, which was on Halloween. So
that's the most metal thing I've heard all day.
Yeah, well, so that really, I have friends and associates who were born on Halloween and it turned out pretty normal. But for me, it was a kind of a life-changing, no pun intended, thing that happened to me because I have always been interested in the paranormal, the occult. Ghost stories were always my favorite. Monster movies. I was a big horror film buff. And so that really kind of framed what happened to me later is when I became a reporter for a local newspaper. What I would try to do is I would try to write Halloween stories, feature stories every year because I was a Halloween baby, I wanted to represent. So that's generally how I got into writing about ghosts and the paranormal. One year I didn't really have a feature story ready, so I just thought, out of the blue, I wanted to investigate some of the stories, the ghost stories from around my hometown of Tyrone, Pennsylvania. So I ended up collecting some, but I didn't collect up a lot, enough to really put together a full feature story. So nearby Tyrone is State College, Pennsylvania, which is where I live now. And it's the home of Penn State, which is usually is on lists every Halloween as the number 2 haunted campus in the country. So I wrote a few stories about that, and I just didn't really think too much of it, put the story out, and it was by far probably the most popular story that I've ever written in my career at that point for the newspaper. I had people coming literally out of the woodwork to talk to me about their ghost stories, and there was something in the back of my mind that thought, well, this is a really, for some reason, this is very powerful, and it really moves people, and people are interested in it. So I started collecting stories about haunted universities, which led to my first book. And then I started, what I tried to do is couple things that I liked, for instance, history, music, with a sort of a supernatural bent. So that's how I got into haunted rock and roll. That's how I got into ghosts of country music, and now haunted World War II. I'm a history minor, by the way. So that's kind of how I could have never predicted that I would be on this show talking to you about the ghosts of universities, rock and roll, country music, or World War II. It just sort of evolved out of this being born on Halloween and loving to write and enjoying, the journalistic aspect of it.
Right. Well, I know. Well, I was born November 30th, so I was like a month and a day off. So
Right.
a little. I guess I came too early. But
Yeah.
But no, there is something very interesting about that time, and it's so funny because sometimes, the sort of I'm also a writer. I write about like local penitentiaries and asylums and things like that, sometimes it seems that people don't realize hauntings go on all year, even through Christmas. I mean, everybody's favorite story, A Christmas Carol is a ghost story, for God's sakes, and and people forget that. So there's a lot of supernatural stuff tied into this time of year that people totally forget. So you talked that you grew up on all that kind of stuff. Did you happen to have any favorite shows or favorite movies from the time or series?
Oh, yeah. In Search Of was just the best for me, and I'll tell you a story about that. I watched Star Trek a little bit, but I was really into In Search Of, and Leonard Nimoy came to a college, Juniata College, near where I lived when I was probably 6th grade. My friend and I scored tickets to it, and I got to meet him, and I got an autograph, and so I kind of come from that background of In Search Of, where you talk about this stuff, but you never come to a solution. I don't know whether you ever noticed, like Leonard Nimoy would say, "Is the Loch Ness Monster haunting Scotland's loch?"
Right.
And then they never get to that. So that really has influenced the way I approach my writing, which is not as a believer and not as a cynic, but as someone who has an open mind, who wants to really tell stories and bring all the facts together and see what we can find. Not even just the facts, just the stories. And it's interesting you were bringing up about how these hauntings happen all year round, because one of the reasons I started writing about these, taking the next step from writing a feature story, let's say, about a ghost, to collecting a bunch of stories and putting it into book form, was that I really missed Halloween. So it was a way for me to have Halloween year round. And so that's one of the things I did.
Right. And you were talking about that whole aspect of going, is this real? Is this a thing? I know on my end as well, it's a thing that either people go too heavy-handed or go sort of, who was the guy on Plan 9? The guy that tells the future all the time, and it always kind of had that quirky, schmaltzy, kind of overly,
talking about,
like not Kreskin or something like that. But I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be, which I love Bill Murray, but I did not want to be him on, what was it, the Psychic Pets thing on Ghostbusters. I didn't want to be that guy, because let's be honest, nobody really knows what it is, or if is it a spirit? Is it some pan-dimensional thing? Is it some creation of our collective consciousness that, for whatever reason, we need it there for some reason? Is it a symbiotic entity? Some sort of shadow creature? I don't know. But I, like yourself, I've always tried to do that, because I don't know. I can make guesses, or I can say, well, my personal theory might be this, but what's that worth?
Yeah, I can tell right away that you've written about this, because of how, when you write, even my approach, which isn't like, I think you investigate, correct? You go into the houses and the penitentiaries and investigate, and I don't really do that. I've never gone on a ghost hunt. The hours sound absolutely horrid to me. But what this does to me is it makes you really reflective of the material. And I've come from a place where, I originally started writing this as entertainment. I think it's kind of fun and cool and interesting, and other people do. And I never really approached it as someone who is, trying to uncover the grand mystery, or someone who has an agenda on spirituality or anything like that.
Right.
But over time, I've come first to respect these people who've told me their stories, or that I've read their stories, who are willing and brave enough to step forward and say, this weird thing happened to me, and now I'm going to be the object of ridicule, but I'm still going to tell you because it's important. And as a reporter, the reporter in me completely respects that. And so I've learned to be more reflective after I write these books. I sit back and I think more and more, like, what is it all about? What is causing, why are we having these experiences, and what do these experiences mean? And so that's one of the cool things that I got as a side benefit from writing these is to meet interesting people and have them tell me their stories and try to collectively figure out what's going on in reality that causes these reactions. And so that's been one of the cool things about and I've come up with my own pet theories as well.
Well, all right, I'll say this. I'll give you just a small smattering of sort of my little origin story. Being from a small Western Kentucky area, it's pretty churchy, a lot of Southern Baptists, that kind of thing. They don't believe the dead can speak. They don't believe that. And this is not me casting any stones at anybody. I'm just giving you a rundown of the beliefs.
Sure.
And anything that is, unless it's an angel, it's a demon. It's very... we're not running around with pitchforks. It's got somewhat more progressive in the last 50 years, but obviously it's not New York. But
yeah.
So the thing was, I had some experiences seeing weird things. I've had one time I had a, when I say visitation, I had saw my great grandmother who had passed not long before. That doesn't happen all the time. It did happen that time, and a few things, and I started just having, occasionally would see this and that, or hear something, and that's not there, and which I've been, obviously, I'm not psychotic or seeing like pink rabbits running up and down the street, but it just sort of stayed with me, and it scared the crap out of me. So I thank God for our local library, Georgetown Library. I have to give them a plug; they're good people. So I went there in the 103.3 esoteric section. I started reading stuff like Hans Holzer, which, people kind of love or hate Hans Holzer, but for me,
Yep.
He was my gateway to going, oh, okay, well, this is what some people believe. And then so I started reading other writers, and okay, what's the background for this, and are these particularly evil, are these particularly good, or whatever. And once I felt that I could kind of understand that most of the time these things aren't dangerous, then it was sort of like, instead of smashing the spider, I started studying the spider. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if for whatever reason it just took, I was sort of I was kind of like the Pugsley kid. This is like 1970s, Salem's Lot era,
Yeah.
haircuts and the striped shirts, and that was me. So I related a lot to the young boy in that movie, because he was scared of a lot of stuff, and because of the stuff he was exposed to. But then once you kind of got somewhat of a grip, or what at least you kind of got a string that you can kind of follow, and it leads you to a much bigger yarn ball, but at least you're on the processes of learning, and you're not letting your fear control you. That's where my investigative stuff comes from. But I know that, it seems like a lot of times when they have those experiences, they either bottle them up, push them back, or they become curious, for whatever reasons. And I think it's a human nature thing. I think by nature we want to seek out knowledge, and I think there's we have a great aptitude for it and a great need for that. I think we just need to know. We just have to learn, and thank God for that, because I've had a lot of folks that shared their stories with me, and I've always tried to be respectful, because I could tell, like you were talking about writing, so many people laugh that off. And don't get me wrong, I've met some people that really needed some therapy, and but overall, anybody that I've spoken to has been very earnest. And you know how it is, people's like, look, I've had people that's like, look, I'm a pastor, this and that, and I have certain beliefs, but this is something I encountered and I can't explain it. I can't wrap it around my paradigm of what I think the world is. It's outside of anything I'm used to. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you that Tyrone, Pennsylvania, probably is not, in the 70s, was probably not appreciably different from Western Kentucky. It was a rural area, and we had science and the supernatural lived together pretty well, because I have heard stories and actually remember that I think there was a story about my uncle getting sick, and they would bring in a powwower. Do you know what? You probably know what that is. It's a folk doctor. I think he had an appendicitis, and the folk doctor kept him well enough to get ready to go to the doctor, the medical doctor. Right. And my mom and my aunt, they were twins, and I'll tell you some of the stories that they have. I consider what that would be an almost psychic connection between the two, and there are numerous stories. So I had this, like, right now I'm a science writer, and some people say, well, how can you do that? And I really feel that all of this is worthy of study. All of these stories are worthy of bringing out and exposing and talking about. And I think that there is a drive for knowledge, but I think there's a real drive to tell stories. And I'll get, one thing I notice about these ghost stories that I've written about, people I've talked to, is that little incidences suddenly become narrative drivers. So you and I were in a house, and a dish falls off the sink, and you might say, well, that's a poltergeist, and someone else might say, well, that was Aunt Ethel, she hated that dish, and I might say, well, that was just a fluke accident. So what happens is you have this really cool narrative tension in all of these stories, that what I find about these stories, the big takeaway for me over the past now 5 books, is that it's not really the ghost. The ghost story is not really about the ghost. It's really about you. It's really about me. And it's about our consciousness interfacing with something we can't understand, which is what all of these things that we do really are. All of our investigative tools, whether it's science or intuition or whatever, psychic powers, is all about that kind of trying to figure this out, trying to tell stories.
Right. Well, you were talking about kind of how people's perceptions and stuff kind of shapes what you see. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much that what we see is whatever the ghost is, or however much of our own psyches and our own baggage, or whatever you want to call it, we're putting on it. There was something, I'm trying to remember what was said. It says, why is every ghost like a 17th century white woman?
Yeah.
Wasn't it some lady screaming, yo, Brittany, open the door, B, or something like that? You never see that. So it's always sort of that gothic, Dark Shadows-esque kind of thing. And I'll ask you this real quick, since before we get really deeply into your books. For me, I've always grew up on, like I said again, like the Hammer films and the old Universal films, and then researching guys like Tesla and things like that. For me, I think probably closer to anything that ghosts, or whatever you want to call them, are electronic, meaning electrical waved beings of some form or another. Mm-hmm. And because everything has some sort of energy pattern, be it running water, be it in a human body, be it whatever, everything has a certain wavelength. And I think for whatever reason we either manifest it, or that's something that at whatever certain times it can tune into certain people's electromagnetic brain patterns and affect them to a point where they see them. I know from doing things on EMF and things like that high enough levels you'll have hallucinations, you'll have rashes, you'll have all kinds of different stuff. It's just in an energy field. So for me, that probably comes closer to I'm not saying like Nikola Tesla was a ghost hunter, but wouldn't that be a cool premise for a movie? But
yeah, that's a great idea.
but it's just I think the people that go science is over here, and the paranormal, which to me paranormal just means knowledge is not known. It doesn't mean that you're out casting stones and rubbing chicken gizzards on somebody's back and trying to get a demon out of them. And again, I'm not throwing.
If it works.
Well, if it were, I mean, you know what? If it cures the person of whatever their ailment is,
Get the gizzards out.
Get the gizzards out, but don't throw them away. Here in the South, we fry those up.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Have you not ever eaten a chicken gizzard, sir?
I have not.
Oh, you've not lived. Man, you need to come to Western Kentucky. I'll make you some gizzards. But
okay. That sounds like a good idea.
It's the prep. He's like, there's no freaking way. Yeah, but...
Well, it's interesting because also some of the things that I think about, some of the things I reflect on are the science, and for me it's the philosophy. So where I can see an opening, because nothing that I've read conclusively proves that ghosts exist. Nothing that I've read conclusively proves that they can't exist. And one of the things I look at and I think about is you have to flip the paradigm upside down from a materialist paradigm to an idealist paradigm, and both science and what we would call the supernatural, anomalous phenomena can't exist together. Because if you think about biology is based on chemistry, chemistry is based on physics, and physics is based on information. If you consider reality an information-based system, then there would be probably no reason why a lot of things can't manifest that probably isn't in our current algorithm that we've built. I'll put it that way. And what I notice when I write these books, and it really struck me when I wrote Haunted Rock and Roll and the Ghost of Country Music, was when I wrote Haunted Rock and Roll, I didn't even know I had read some stuff by R. Gary Patterson, take a walk on the dark side, and I had a few ghost stories. But when I dove into it, I just found, I actually wrote a second volume to it. There were so many of ghost stories of the occult, stories of curses, psychic powers among rock stars, psychic connections among rock stars, connections between fans and rock stars, that I started to think there really has to be a reason why this is happening. And it wasn't, and I thought, well, a couple things. One is that rock and roll tends to be what I would consider a outsider art, that people from outside the mainstream come in and create this art. So they're not afraid of supernatural ideas or going outside of traditional spiritual ideas and things like that. So I thought that might have to do it. But when I came away from the Ghosts of Country Music, where I found just as many ghost stories there and as many stories about supernatural among country musicians, is that there's something special about music that raises the consciousness of listeners, and especially the musicians themselves, that make them more apt to experience or talk about these sort of things. And likewise with the Haunted World War II book, I started to see that war, the trauma, the terror is also affects the consciousness of people, of humans, that they too must be opened to these either supernatural ideas or that they really do experience it. So for me, I'm starting more and more to see a connection between consciousness and the supernatural, or this anomalous phenomena.
Sure. Well, something I was going to just throw in there real quick. It's one of those type of deals. If I lose my train of thought, I can't get my ticket back. The connection between music and the supernatural. I mean, if you look at stuff like the dance of the whirring dervish and all that, and go back to the early. Anything from early Sumerian things, Gregorian chants, all this stuff is used to set a tone and a mood and a mental state. That,
absolutely.
Be it you listen to something good, something upbeat, or if you listen to something, if a person who's not into rock or blues, which to me all country was like poor white guy blues, which obviously, was come in from, the slave culture and stuff. It was a thing that people's like, well, why are you listening to this song while I'm down? And it's like, well, it's a sad song, and it makes me feel a little bit better what I'm dealing with. It might be something as easy as that, or it's like, I want to hear somebody sing about how I'm feeling right now. That's
a consciousness connection. You're connecting your consciousness with this other artist's consciousness.
Right.
That's what. Yeah.
Well, what was the old saying? You play a country music song, you get your dog back, you get your house back, you get your wife back, and there's real truth to that. I mean, being like I said, being here in Western Kentucky, growing up, my father was like a real big country guy, and like trucker, Red Sylvine country, and all kinds of stuff. There was a song, and I don't know, you probably don't know this, I don't know how much of a country guy you are. As I got older, I became more of a rock and metal and punk guy. But there's a song, I think it was Dolly Parton and, I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Blonde-haired guy, always wore these crazy snail trail-looking suits. Porter Wagoner.
Yeah, Porter Wagoner, yeah.
And I think it was called Jeannie's Afraid of the Dark. And they had a kid that passed away. And so they kept like this eternal flame by her grave, because they talked about they didn't want her being afraid of the dark. I was listening to this when I was a little kid, and I was like, holy shit, what, scared the crap out of me. Actually, that and the works of Poe made me scared about being buried alive, which who wants that? But there's so much in it. It's not all, well, I'm going to go down, and I'm going to have me a beer, and I'm going to dance with this girl. It's pop country and original country are worlds different, and there's so much real life loss in it,
Oh my God, yeah. Country music is infused spiritually for sure, and it did come from blues. It also came from Celtic spirituality. It also came from Irish, Scottish music, and music was primarily used as a tool to raise consciousness throughout the ages, for sure.
You had mentioned the curse. Now, are we talking about the curse of, I'm going to get the number wrong. Is it 23, 30? I'm dyslexic, so I get my numbers turned around.
Yeah, the 27 Club. That's
yes.
one. There's also the Crossroads Curse of Robert Johnson.
Right.
They're all connected. So, rock and roll has all these little curse stories. I think there's a grunge curse with all the lead singers and frontmen from grunge bands dying, which also
certainly seems that way. Yeah, well, that probably didn't hurt.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Well, I know where you're from. In here, it's like, again, people are different. People are the same, and even if people aren't at a certain level now, they probably were 50 years ago. And like I know, like, we have the things of like this certain intersection, there was a witch buried there, because you buried witches in intersections, so they didn't know which way to, I guess, follow you back. And
sure.
And I know that
plus it forms a cross.
Right, as protection. There's actually a place down here, and I won't get into it too much, but Google Little Witch's Grave, Marion, Kentucky, sometime.
Okay.
Very interesting place. Sad story. Really sad story. And they, a woman was accused of witchcraft. The mother and the daughter was 6 years old. Apparently they burnt the mother, buried her outside of the graveyard, and put the little child, because she was, I guess, younger than the age of, I don't know what it is, of age of knowing or of really knowing what she was doing. I think she was burned as well, but they buried her in the graveyard, and they put a big bunch of fencing around her in the shape of like connecting crosses. It had concrete poured over it, or gravel, then concrete, and then a mesh put over the top of the fence, because they said if you got in there, the little witch would try to pull you down. Well,
wow.
The family had said that this was not true, but I knew there had been a couple different death certificates, and it's just sort of, I don't know. Maybe they concreted it in because maybe somebody was trying to dig the kid up. I don't know why they would, but I've actually had been there, and it is weird. I've got a few weird pictures, and I definitely heard sounds of stuff walking outside the graveyard.
Wow.
And I shined lights, could hear it, couldn't see anything. But it's so strange that even now, even to this day, people know that area, and it's just part sort of our, I guess, dark heritage and lexicon of the area that everybody knows this. And I think it's something that is timeless, as much as someone might, in maybe a very innocent way, hope something goes well and they knock a piece of wood. I mean, that goes way back. I mean, there's these ancient occult symbols, and nowadays people think like maybe an okay is something mystical. Now it's mystical, where when I was a kid it was just something you saw the Argane kids do. But it goes way, way back into the occult world, and touching on stuff like Crowley or Crowley, however you pronounce it. So you were talking on some of those curses. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I as far as there's the story of Robert Johnson and the Crossroads curse. And
sure.
It's the origin story of rock and roll, and it still is a narrative frame, even today, as far as I'm concerned. Well, we've kind of gone into the rap world, but so Robert Johnson wanted to be a guitar player. His options as a black man in that area in Mississippi Delta were pretty slim, and he looked at these blues guys, and they were having fun and making money, and ladies seemed to like him, and he wanted to be a blues guitar player. The problem was he wasn't very good, and he annoyed the bejeezers out of the great blues guitar players of that era at that time, and they were fantastic guitar players. And eventually they basically kicked him out of the circle, and he just couldn't learn, is the way they would say it. People would talk about how he couldn't play very well. So he disappears for about a year. He comes back, and the story goes that Son House, one of the guitar players at the time, and some of his other friends were out in the parking lot after playing a set at a juke joint, and they heard this phenomenal guitar playing, and they couldn't figure out who it was. Everyone was out in the parking lot. They go in, and there's Robert Johnson, who is playing not just tunes that he couldn't master, but he's playing now in a way that is uniquely his own. And so there was always a African American myth that about doing a deed, selling your soul to the devil at the crossroads at midnight, and it quickly spread that he made this deal, and that rumor spread, and Robert Johnson's fame grew and grew to a certain point, and then he dies tragically and somewhat in a gross fashion at the age of 27. He might have been poisoned, but it was a terrific, terrible ordeal that he went through. He was screaming, barking like a dog, moaning until he finally died. And a lot of those people at that time said that was just the devil coming to collect on his contract. So that story becomes really well known in those early rock and roll circles, but it also speaks to kind of the artist journey of someone who, almost all of these bands that make it big, almost all these celebrities that make it big in rock and roll come from the outside. So you have Elvis Presley wasn't born in New York City. He wasn't born in L.A. He was born kind of in Tupelo, Mississippi. He lived in the bad side of the streets in Memphis, and he revolutionizes music. The Beatles didn't come from London, they came from Liverpool. They didn't come from New York, they came from England. So you have this constant recycling of new ideas where Elvis comes in, he changes everything, he gets fame and fortune, and then he starts to suffer for that, and his art starts to suffer. The Beatles went through a similar kind of pattern where they, rocketed to the top, and then all of a sudden they had infighting, and they started to fall apart as a band until later they weren't producing kind of the magic that they used to, and they had to break up. So you have this interesting supernatural frame that becomes also a pattern, and I think that's one of the most fascinating stories of rock and roll.
Well, you show that pattern of sort of eating yourself. You get to a certain point, to the point of what else can you consume, what else can you be stimulated by, and I think that there's a certain point, because so many people, especially I don't want to say people that are marginalized, but are definitely on the fringe, never had exposure to some of the things that they had once they got that success, and all they thought the world was getting that, and then once it's there, it's like, oh, well, what's more? So either they go to something that's more kind of esoteric or an occult or whatever, and sometimes it leads them down darker paths, and that plus whatever emotional shortcomings. Because I have a lot of friends that are comedians and a lot of friends that are artists, and they're all damaged. I'm sure I am too. Otherwise, why would you do some of the stuff that you do? Put yourself out there like that.
That's really what art's all about, is that we're all a little cracked, and we're all trying to figure out how to fill it in. And that's what art does, and that's why art is so powerful, because art's meant to be shared. And I think that's why rock and roll is a little special, because it's accepting of those. It's more accepting, I would say, of those cracks and damages than other art forms, which are, even I say that, and the country ghosts, when I wrote the Country Ghost book, Johhny Cash came off to me as a pioneer ghost hunter. He really was interested in it. He studied it. He had a ghost in Jamaica. His mansion was haunted, and he studied it, and he tried to debunk the phenomena. And so I consider it just an artist, that when you are an artist, your consciousness is somehow goes to levels where you are able to contemplate and experience things that probably the more rational people don't.
Well, there's a certain point too, you get closer to the eye of the hurricane of the oh my God, where's my next meal coming from? Oh my God, hope I can make the house payment. To once you get to a certain level where that's not an everyday concern, you can see further. You get on that plateau above all that noise, and you can see further, and you can see a bigger picture. It's funny, the thing with Johhny, I'm calling John like I know him, that he was very special in regards, especially in sort of the southern, country, whatever you want to call it, a hierarchy of people. Obviously, everybody in the South loved Elvis, but Johhny had this thing that he had really went through a lot of dark stuff. He had always dealt with addiction, but he always tried to be, a good guy, and he always kind of come back. He'd always kind of go down on one knee, but he always come back up. He was he was a fighter, and even in his darkest times and stuff, he was always a very powerful writer, even up into the, I think, was it 13? I think him and Glenn Danzig had done a song together, Def Jam and stuff, and turned a lot of people on to Johhny Cash. But for me, it really doesn't surprise me that he would do that, because, like you said, he always kind of touched on dark subjects, and the original Man in Black.
Yeah, and I think the death of his brother probably put that in his head too at such a young age, that put that idea of what death is, and is it the final answer? Is it the final end? So, he's definitely, I consider him a pioneering ghost hunter. And there's a great story about how Waylon Jennings, I think it was Waylon Jennings and his wife, were staying over at Cash's, and I'm trying to think, I can't remember the name of the mansion, Cinnamon House or something like that, in Jamaica. And they heard a rattling all night long on the walls, and they were sure that it was a ghost, because they had heard all these ghost stories that Johhny told them. So instead of just taking it as a ghost story, Cash went out and he examined the room, and he looked around, and sure enough, he found that one of the tree branches was blowing against the the room, outside the room.
Mm-hmm.
But he also mentions in his biography, in the next breath, that he was standing they were having a dinner party at the retreat, and it was I think they were in the kitchen, or maybe in the dining room, and there was a set of doors at one end and a set of doors at the other, big double doors. The double doors at the one end were closed, and Cash said that he and 6 other people were in the room, and they clearly saw a woman come in through the one set of double doors, walk by this dinner party, and then walk through the doors into the kitchen or into the next room. So he would basically, what he was saying is that you have to keep an open mind, because that was never debunked. So he's had these powerful experiences.
Right. Well, are you familiar with the group he was in, the Highwaymen?
Yes.
Okay, so you're familiar with there's this one song, and it basically touches on reincarnation. So I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Is that
I think the Highwaymen. Well, no. Actually, I think it was a song called The Highwayman. I Am the Highwayman, and it was him, Chris Christopherson, Willie, and Wailing too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, and that shows you too that whole kind of circle had an interest in it, and you hear.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Merle Kilgore, Johnny Horton, and Johhny Cash. I consider that the paranormal partnership in my book, because they experienced it. They were also into the Sleeping Prophet.
Edgar Casey. He grew up.
Edgar Casey.
He's not 25 miles from where I'm at right now.
Oh wow, that is so cool. So they were into Edgar Casey, and there was another guy named Bernard Ricks who was essentially a psychic that they all followed at one time. And Bernard Ricks is just a real interesting cat, because I can't find much about him, but apparently he was a postman, a mailman, but he met Merle Kilgore, who was a songwriter, and Johnny Cash and Johnny Horton, and became somewhat of a supernatural guru to these folks, and helped them meditate, passed on messages from beyond the grave. It's just a fascinating thing.
Well, and that's so funny is that and I'm sorry, we're kind of going down one path for a bit,
okay.
but no, I was just saying, here in this part of Kentucky, that's in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, was the area that you're thinking of, and what's so funny, Casey went on to form a large foundation that studied all this, and because I'll see like Casey's Mill, because they're still in business, and no one knows anything about it, so it's just one of those things that happened during the time, and spiritualism was really big at one time, and just like a lot of things go out of vogue, but it's slowly kind of having a resurgence. And I think that, just like you're talking about how like music and rap and all this, I think you'll see a resurgence of at least one of those. Maybe a little bit more rocky, but it's probably been a different view. But
I wouldn't doubt it.
I mean, I think the paranormal is just erroneously linked to that. Anytime you have artists and things like that, guys like Salvador Dali, and a lot of people that kind of would walk the razor's edge of touching on things like that. It's just it's almost a prerequisite. The devil is. It depends on how you look at him. Some people see him as a hero. Some people see him as sort of the original anarchist, but in a positive way. I mean, what was the thing from chaos comes rebirth? Sure. So,
yeah, that's part of the cycle, right?
Right. So it's sort of interesting how there's that element of that. But I was going to ask you too about the World War II book. Tell me the slant you took on it. I mean, how did you, and what made you, first of all, how did you come about doing this, and what made you want to focus on a book fully about World War II ghosts?
Right. So there's not a great heroic story behind this. So I'm a history minor, and I really love the American Civil War. I don't love it. I
am too.
I enjoy writing about it, reading about it, So once I was done with the country book, I had a second rock and roll book that I was starting, and I pitched that to the publishers, and they were like, nah, not so much, let's move on. So I just started thinking I'd like to, I have this history minor. I know that American Civil War has so many ghost stories. And so I thought I'll write a book about the Civil War and haunted Civil War. But when I looked at it, I'll tell you, it's just so well documented. The hauntings are so well documented, so well covered. I couldn't really find anything fresh that anyone else didn't have. And again, I'm a compiler. I compile these books. I bring these stories together with sort of like kind of a cinch it together with another hobby of mine, which would be history. So I just decided I would look into World War II ghosts, and my logic behind that was, well, if the Civil War has ghost stories, then World War II does too, and it really does. And so I started writing that, pitched it, they accepted it, and I started going. What I found right away, right out of the gate, is that for the first time ever, this is really a global conflict. So there are ghost stories all over the world, which I thought was interesting. And the other thing with World War II, probably for the first time, arguably on a pretty well developed sense, there's a 3D dimension to war. So there are ghosts on the ground, there are ghosts on the sea, but there's also ghosts in the air. And so what I tried to do is look at it almost like I wanted every branch of the service to be included in it. So I have ghosts of haunted ships, I have haunted planes and haunted airfields, and I also have ghost planes, which was a bit of a twist for me. And I also have ghosts of the battlefields. The other thing that intrigued me, and really what I started thinking about, I actually wanted this to be called Weird War II because I wanted to get into some things that I like to write about that I usually don't get a chance to write about, because primarily I write about ghosts, but I am very interested in the Fortean aspects of history, the strange coincidences and the synchronicities, and also I am interested in the occult background of some of these leaders. So in this book, and also it's like in Haunted Rock and Roll, something I really got from R. Gary Patterson was this looking into the occult Fortean aspects of music. And so I did that with Haunted World War II. And for me, that became one of the, I think some people write books because they know what they're talking about. And I write books because I really don't have a clue and I want to find out. And, I have a lot of biases, just like anyone else. I have a lot of preconceived notions. But as I was writing Haunted World War II, my first idea was that, well, the Nazis, because I'm so knowledgeable, I've watched all the Indiana Jones movies, that the Nazis were deeply infected by the occult, and that the Allies were not. They were following more traditional forms of Christianity. But what happened was that as I got done with that section, my thinking now is that the Nazis had a lot less to do with the occult, and I can give a reason for that, and that actually the American and the Allies actually had a lot more interaction with the occult. There are stories about a convention of witches that came together to get Germany to stop the Nazis from invading. I think it's Operation Cone of Power that I write about. In America, the New Thought movement, which I covered a little bit, was actively getting people to focus their consciousness on stopping the Nazis. But meanwhile, what you have in Nazi Germany is the repression of occult groups. And logically, it kind of follows that Hitler didn't want anyone competing with him, not the devil, not God, nobody. So in order to limit the competition for the state, he started purging those groups. So that was one of the cool things that I think I learned from writing this book.
Right. And it seems that because, like you said, he didn't want any competition. It's sort of like when any larger religion kind of takes over, they either kind of absorb the different holidays and traditions and whatnot, or they totally stamp them out. Going through busting up different things, and then trying to basically erase it. And I mean, it seems like there definitely was a lot connected to that, and that even to today. I mean, it depends on who you talk to. A lot of people said there's still a lot of occult stuff going on in regards of politics, and which I mean, you could go real deep, you could get real conspiracy about it, but I think we're so much still in the I don't want to say the animal brain, but we're definitely not that far out of the caves. And I will say that initially Hitler used those occult groups. There's definitely an occult influence on the Nazi Party, but what I found is that he eventually suppressed that. Right. Well, I knew there's like the Vril and some of the other other German mysticist groups.
Right.
But I was going to ask you real quick, because we are kind of winding down, and again, I want to thank you for being on. If people are wanting to get your books, or if you have any sort of appearances or conventions or whatever, puppet shows, whatever you want to throw on, why don't you throw me some of those web pages real quick?
Easiest way to get a hold of me is mattswayne.com. That's MattsWayne. I'm also on Facebook. My books are available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Please, if you visit your local Barnes & Noble or your local independent, tell them about the book, see if they can get it in for you. If you like the book, please give me please rate it on Amazon and give me a review. If you don't, if you could just send me a scathing email.
And it's so fun. People don't realize that. I know. That really means a lot.
I get on this show and I talk to you, and I feel like I can explain my philosophy behind writing these, and I read some of these Amazon reviews, and it's like, just talk to me 5 minutes, because I'm not trying to write that book that you think that book is, Right. So, but anyways.
And honestly, I guarantee half of them didn't, and it's either they something turned them off in regards of it, or something, or
sure.
There's so much backbiting in the writing world. I won't even get into that, but it's a thing. If you take 5 minutes, and again, I've followed your writing for a while and your interviews for a while, and that's the reason I have you on here, because this is a very,
I appreciate it.
Hey man, anytime. For me, it's a very kind of selfish, self-serving thing, but I'm honest about it. I like to talk to people I find interesting, and that I think other people find interesting, and you really bring a different kind of a different thing at it, because you don't overham it, you don't try to turn it into like a scientific breakdown, and
it's impossible to do that. So,
well, I think if you go either one way or the other, I think that you lose the heart of it. You have to come at it in the sort of the way that you do, and in a smaller way, the way I try to in my own writing. You just can't do that. I mean, and I think the way that you serve it up, and especially in the way that you tend to, like, it seems like you come at it from a point of heart and of interest, and for me that fires me up, man. When I see someone who's excited about what they're doing, it excites me to want to learn more about it. And well, let me ask you, what is your next thing that you got going on? Are you kind of kicking back, or what? You got some other stuff coming down the pipe?
I just wrapped up a book on Haunted Rail, which will be a look at some of the railroad ghost stories in this country. And well, across the world, because I found some in England and Sweden, believe it or not. So that's what I'm doing. And after that, I really don't know. I would love to keep writing about music and the supernatural. So, I might keep doing that.
You should try. And I'm sorry to keep jumping in.
No, fine.
You should really check up on like in Haiti and like stuff like the Jamaican stuff. Like there's a lot of Bob Marley. There's a Bob Marley curse that's very interesting, and off air I'll touch it a little bit more because I don't want to give away any ideas to anybody. But okay. Matt, I appreciate having you on. I'm getting ready to do my.
Thank you very much.
I'm getting ready. Hey, anytime. I'm getting ready to do my outro, and if you'll stick around for 2 seconds, and I'll talk to you for one more minute.
Okay.
All right, bud. Well, there it was, everybody. Matt Swayne, the Swainster, letting us know about all his crazy books that he's got going out there. Actually a really sweet guy. I want you guys to go out and enjoy your day. Get what sunlight that you can. But as the sun goes down and the shadows grow long, make sure to check under your bed, in your closet, down the back hallway, the back stairs, because you never know what's there. You might have the spirit of Johhny Cash doing some investigation in your pantry, who knows. But as always, love yourselves, love each other, and try to make the world a little bit better place than it was before you found it. But don't be afraid to allow yourself to be a little scared. So until next time, everybody, take care. Boom. Okay, there's that.